CBC News has obtained documents that show public colleges and universities, not private ones, are driving the rapid increase in international students across the country. The numbers call into question claims made by both federal and provincial politicians that a handful of bad actors among private colleges were responsible for the situation. CBC's Valérie Ouellette has been crunching the numbers.
We obtained documents that were compiled directly by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. So these are the government's own numbers. And what they show is how more than 1.5 million new study permits were distributed between 2018 and 2023 to 1,300 colleges and universities across the country. And what we found really flips on its head or goes against what the kind of messaging that we've heard from federal and provincial politicians so far about the reasons why this cap had to be put nationwide. Our first finding, and you can see on the graphics here, is that the top 10 schools that had the most study permits approved last year, 9 of them are in Ontario. And in fact, 8 of them are Ontario public colleges. And here's how much their numbers for these specific schools have increased since 2018. So as we can see, some schools have doubled or tripled the volume of new study permits that are approved by the federal government every single year. So we're seeing these big volumes for a number of specific schools. But I want to be clear here, these aren't just a number of schools that we've cherry-picked for an effect. These aren't outliers. This is a systemic problem that is driven by Ontario public colleges. Ontario public colleges alone account for 40% of all permits issued nationwide last year. So we're talking about a disproportionate representation of approved study permits coming specifically from Ontario and specifically public institutions.
And Valérie, as you point out there, this is not really in line with what we have heard from some politicians recently, but we did just a few moments ago hear from some federal ministers reacting on their way into cabinet. What are they saying?
Our colleagues on the Hill put the question to Immigration Minister Mark Miller. Here's what he had to say.
No, not at all. I mean, obviously private colleges have their responsibility. The private-public relationships and arrangements do have had an exponential jump. You have the Conestogas, the Senecas of the world. They have some of the highest asylum claims in Canada. They're in the top 10, 700, 800 last year. That is totally unacceptable. That spike is alarming, and that spike exists in the public schools as well. They have some work to do in terms of the quality of the education that they provide to these people and the people that they engage to recruit people abroad. So there's a responsibility to go around, Catherine. I just think that some of the really, really bad actors are in the private sphere, and those need to be shut down. But there is responsibility across the board, and we're willing to assume it. We just need the provinces in question, in this case Ontario, to assume their responsibility.
So that was Minister Mark Miller responding to CBC's findings this morning that, this crisis was not in fact driven by a couple of bad actors that are private colleges. And you can hear in his response that he's still reiterating that point that, when it comes to quality of education, the government wants to go after some specific private colleges. But you also heard him mention that now he's saying public schools as well across the board. So I want to talk a little bit about these top 10 schools that you saw earlier that I talked about, including Conestoga, some names that were also dropped by Minister Miller. We reached out to these top 10 schools that have increased their numbers the most in the past 6 years. And the majority of them told us mostly the same things, which is that they were trying to align with federal and provincial immigration policies, which urged them to seek more skilled workers, train more skilled workers as well. And a number of them also admitted that, international students do bring in a lot of money and that they have had to compensate somehow for the lack of public funding that has decreased significantly over the same period, these 6 years.